Today, I'm going to show you how to make one of the most sought after sounds in electronic dance music, that Future Bass Synth. And we're starting right now. What is up, everyone? My name is Daniel. If this is your first time here and you want to learn all things electronic music production related when it comes to mixing, mastering, sound design, and arrangement, go ahead and click the subscribe button and click the bell notification next to it so you don't miss anything. For those of you who already make Future Bass, I'd love to hear your tips and tricks on how you make the genre in the comments below. In this how to make a Future Bass Synth tutorial, I'm going to go over the layering of the sounds, the individual and group processing of the sounds, and the added effects on the sound. So let's get into the DAW and make that Future Bass Synth.
Okay, so let's listen to the little drop that I made first. That was our Future Bassy drop. Okay, so first let's just go over the main chords. So here's the main chord structure that I started with. And we're at F minor. Minor keys work well for Future Bass, and I'm really just using a lot of 7th chords here. 7 chords give it that moody type of feel. So what I like to do first is just write out the progression and then chop them up in your track. And I usually like to get the drums down first. So I literally just took the MIDI and just started chopping around with it. So that's how I came up with the chords there. So it's important to note before we go into any of the processing and layering is that all these channels here except the drums are being fed into a side chain. And this side chain is being triggered by the kick and the snare. Now remember, there are 3 parts to constructing the Future Bass sound. So we'll go over the first one, and that is the actual layers of the sound. And we'll also mix in number 2, which is the individual and group processing of the sounds. So let's give you a listen to the main meat of the sound without the group processing on. So that's the main sound. So let's go over the individual layers of the sound. So first we'll start with, of course, the main layer. Now for the main layer, the idea is to have it spread and kind of be the foundation for the whole sound. Now I found for your foundation layer, it's best to have them as simple as possible, and just having saw waves as your main layer really just fills out the frequency spectrum. It's a very simple sound, just saw waves, but it's the most effective. You use your top layers for more of the ornamental and timbrally interesting sounds. So really nothing to it, just an OTT on it, and that's it. So we'll take a listen to that. So yeah, just simple saws. And also after, we have another OTT processing it just to bring it out even more. And then we have EQing. Now, it's probably one of the most important parts of the layering for Future Bass chords is the EQing of the sounds. Now there will be a general principle of what to do when EQing these sounds, and that is to be cutting more than you are boosting. And a rule of thumb for you guys for cutting these sounds is to really pay attention to the 500 and 250 hertz range, as these really muddy up quickly in your mixes and will probably be the most problematic for you guys. So it's a really good idea to use the 250 and 500 as a good starting point for your EQ sweeping to find out what gives the most mud in your sounds. So then next we have a saturator, and you'll also see I do a lot of saturation after I do this EQing, as just to give a little more power back into the sound after I do all the subtractive EQing. So then next we have a Haas delay. So what we're doing with this is we're making it really, really wide in the mix. We want this layer to be as wide as possible. And the way we achieve that is by separating it into 2 channels, pan 1 hard left, pan 1 hard right. And on one of these channels, we're going to put it on a delay. And this delay doesn't really sound like a delay. If you put a delay on that's between 15 milliseconds and around 25 milliseconds, your ear is not going to be able to discern the actual delay of the sound, and it's just going to appear wider to you. So putting a delay on a channel and putting it between 15 and 25 milliseconds is going to make it sound really, really wide. So we'll listen to it with and without. Now without. So it really spreads it out. Our next layer is the mono layer. Now this is really important to have if you're going to have a really spread layer like the Haas one we have. And we want this mono layer, so when we play our song on mono systems, it's going to come through on the speakers. So if we didn't have this mono layer, this main sound is going to sound kind of phasey. So let's take a listen to the main sound in mono right now. So as you can hear, it sounds a little out of phase, and it sounds a little bit weaker. So we really need to reinforce this with the mono layer. So let's take a listen to the mono layer. It's a nice centered sound that'll come through on a lot of systems. So let's take a look at the sound. And really it's just kind of saw waves again, a little squarey right here. And then we have some white noise with a really quick envelope on it. So it'll give it that nice little tick at the beginning of each chord hit. So it'll really punch through the mix. And just once again, OTT on, and just an EQ cutting out the low frequencies. So really nothing crazy here, just pretty much saws once again. And then next we are taking out more frequencies and boosting a little bit here. And just make sure everything's mono. We turn the width down on a utility, so it's 100% mono. And then once again, after EQing, we're doing saturation, just to put a little more power back into the sound. So now let's listen to those two layers in mono. So that mono layer gives it the power and clarity that it needs for mono systems. Now next we have a top layer. Now this top layer is what's going to give it a little more character, because right now we just have saws. So let's take a listen to it. It's a real vibrato-y, kind of whiny sound. So let's take a look at it. It's a little more complex waves. Give it a more interesting character, a little movement on it. Little distortion, compression, and boosting some frequencies. So a pretty standard lead. And then next we are EQing out a lot, as there's a lot of mud, and once again around the 400-ish, 439 range, 500 range. And then again saturating after we do a lot of EQ cutting. So this top layer is really important, as it really fills out the track. If you didn't have this layer, it'd kind of sound a little weak and there'd be something missing. It's important to note that we use the top notes of the chords for the top layer. So we just grab the MIDI, as you can see, the D sharp 4, that's D sharp 4, so we just did that for every single chord. So these are the very top notes. That's really going to lift it out of the mix. Okay, so then after the top layer, we have white noise. Now everyone knows that white noise is a staple in electronic music production, and having it go along with the chords just gives it that extra power, crisp, and really full sound that your chords need to have. So once again, simple white noise. Let's take a listen. And we're just cutting out the low end of that. We just want that top end sizzle. Okay, and then next we have the bass sound. Now for the bass notes, I just took the very bottom note of the main chords. Now for the bass sound, I just took the main SERUM over and used that patch. So as you can see, it's just saw waves. Once again, I found that these really give the most power to your track. just using simple waves that will fill out the frequency spectrum. And then I have an OTT on it, just bringing out the sound a little bit. And I have an EQ, just cutting out a little mud, cutting out the sub of it, boosting up the mid frequencies to give it a little more presence in the mix. And then of course the saturation again. Okay, so that's it for the main sound, the bulk of the sound. We have two more components to the sound. And the first one is the sub. So for the sub, we have a simple sine wave going here. Any soft synth will work. Simple is best and the most powerful. And what we're doing here is we're separating it into two channels. One with the pure unaffected sine wave. And then we have a mid-range layer, which really adds more depth and a little more power to the sub. So for this mid-range layer, we're cutting out the sub of it, as we only want the pure sine tone cutting through there. We want nothing else in the track affecting that 30 to 90 hertz range. So we're cutting that out, cutting out some mid frequencies, and then saturating it to give it a little more grit, to give it a little more presence in the mix. And then once again, EQing, cutting out the low end, really making sure that nothing gets through to that sub area. And then a little stereo widening in the higher frequencies up here. This will give your subs a lot more depth instead of just having a plain sine wave going. The key point here is to make sure that nothing is affecting the sub part of it. So then we have some group processing on both the sub and the mid layer. Once again, more EQing, just to make sure it doesn't sound too tubby in the mix. And a saturator, once again, after the EQing. And we'll go over the vibrato and the line in a second here. Okay, then last is our top lead. So a real timbrely, interesting sound here. As you can see, the waves are a little more complex here. I really just wanted to shine through in the mix over the saw waves that we have going. So then we're just processing it with an OTT just to bring it out, just to bring the delay and reverb out a little more. And I have some more EQing. Once again, that 500 range is killer. Here, just let you guys hear what it sounds like without this. Now without. So really tubby sounding and muddy. So of course, again, a saturator after, give a little more power back into it, more harmonics. So that's it for the layering of the chords. Now we'll go over a little group processing and we'll go over a little effects and movement for the chords. So for the main drop synth that we have a little chain here. So once again, we do have EQing. So it's also important to notice that around the 1K range, it can also get really muddy. So add that to the list as well, 250, 500, and the 1K range. As with a lot of layers, this can really sound too brittle and dominate the whole mix, and you can't hear anything else. So it's important to look at this range as well. And these two cuts here, one at around 7,345. This one gives room for the top lead and for the high end of the drums. This is really important to have, as without it, this would dominate too much of the mix. Once again, we have a lot of saw waves in there that have a lot of harmonic content. And if you just let those go in there, they're going to be competing with the high end of the drums, namely the hi-hats and the top lead. And we really want those to shine through on top of everything else in the mix. So having this cut is important. And, it's not going to be the same for every, synth that you do. You'll kind of have to just sweep around a little bit to see which sounds best with your top lead and hats. So then onto the more group processing. We have a reverb. And it's important to note that we don't have any reverb on any of these layers here. As for this main chunk layer, we just want a reverb on the entire group and not the individual elements, as that will really cause mixing problems. Once again, more mud will be added if you have multiple reverbs with different settings, different pre-delays, different sizes. It's just best to have one individual reverb on. And then next we have the vibrato. So that's pretty much it for the group processing. We'll talk about the align after. That's the group processing. So now we'll move on to the effects and the movement of the track. So what I like to do on a lot of the Future Bass chords is to have a vibrato on. So I'm using the M multi-band vibrato. So I found that a pitch wobble in the 16th note range really works well on Future Bass chords. So let's take a listen to with and without it. So with it, and right here, here's the automation for it. So without it, it kind of sounds a little stale. The vibrato really gives it that lift. It feels like it's going up and really contributes to that Future Bassy vibe. So we're having that every couple of bars here. So that's very important to have in your Future Bass chords. And then of course, auto filter, just doing some high cutting. Once again, adds movement to the track. Very simple, but very effective. Now the very last piece of processing that I want to go over is the auto align. Now when you have a lot of synths and a lot of plugins processing these synths, your computer has to do a lot of math, and there's a very small amount of latency that comes along with that. Now it'll probably be very small amount of latency, pretty inaudible, but it does contribute to the overall impact that your sound gives. So what the auto align does is it tries to reduce this latency and tries to make sure that when you tell a MIDI note to hit, that it hits exactly where you drew that note. Now I found that this really impacts the overall sound, really the overall weight of the sound. Like I said, it's very subtle difference. It's just making sure that every MIDI note hits exactly where you drew it. Now I find that this is most apparent on the sub of your track. Having the sub hit exactly where you drew the MIDI note is really important for the power of the sound. It's even more so than the synths, especially on the downbeat when you have a kick going. If your kick and sub are kind of off, you're gonna notice a power difference in it. And having the auto align on reduces that latency. Like I said, it's very subtle difference. I don't know if you guys would be able to hear it. I'll play the drums along with the sub so you guys can hear the difference. But trust me, it's more of a feel. You can feel more power rather than hear. Without the auto align. So really just a slight difference, just a little more power there. And that is it for the constructing of Future Bass chords.
Thank you for watching the video, everyone. I hope you got a bunch of tips and tricks on how to get that Future Bass synth. And if you'd like to learn more about electronic music production when it comes to mixing and mastering, arrangement, and sound design, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you won't miss anything. Also, be sure to check out SOUNDSHOCKaudio.com, as there is plenty of free music production resources for you guys in the form of samples, loops, presets, KONTAKT instruments, and plugins. See you guys next time.